what is the kind of target with the token sale? And also, can you maybe talk a little bit about the tokenomics of with the Bitlauncher token?
Sure. Tokenomics is incredibly important. And so I think architecting that and designing that is incredibly important to get right. So just thinking about the economics, it's the traditional world has built systems based on economic theories that make sense. Like sometimes you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. So the idea of an equity token, right, a security token actually makes sense because you're really just distributing ownership based on contributions in a startup at an early stage. And so how do you apply that same economic concept of fair distribution of ownership via equity to tokens, right? And I think partly the reason why people have avoided this idea is more for regulatory reasons. Oh, I don't want to be a security, right? And so they avoid it. They say, okay, hey, how do we make it so that it's like a security, but it's not a security? And so they try to manage that process. But I think we found a solution that is, I think, it's still a utility token. It's a gray area, right? Because the ownership is very much equity-like. Instead of giving shares to contributors as you would do in the traditional startup world, you give shares for all the early employees and your investors and whoever's contributing, you give tokens. So it's just that, in that respect, it's the same thing. And you could do it more easily with tokens because you don't need a lot of this legal paperwork to issue these, quote unquote. So that's the base of that it's very similar to traditional equity. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. This has worked for a lot of companies for hundreds of years. The second thing is we don't have a fixed supply of tokens, just as if in the traditional world, you can always issue more tokens, right? You issue more shares and more equity, right? Like you could do debt or equity, and most people do equity in early stage startups, give option packages, whatnot. So in our world, it's every contributor, rather than adding some complicated options package or anything like that, we just issue tokens. We dilute by giving it to contributors who helped with either capital contributions, which is cash to the treasury, or helping with marketing, development, operations, right? So all the contributors just get tokens. So it's just almost as if they're getting shares of a company, right? The other aspect is how do you close that so that you're not just diluting all the time, right? And one of the things that we've lost is in the crypto world is the idea of fundamentals, cash flow. Like we don't talk about cash flow, and for the same reasons. It looks like a security. We shouldn't talk about cash flow. We'll try to avoid it. We'll just be a governance token, but economically that doesn't make sense. With cash flow or any cash flow generating company, let's say an AI startup, or when we generate through fees our cash, it can be used to buy back the tokens in the system. So you reduce the supply, and when you reduce the supply, the token value should appreciate. So you balance out the dilution with going to contributors with the cash flow that will reduce the supply. And the point is to really generate a lot more cash flow compared to and that's where you get this balancing of economics. That's how traditional companies work. We're just transferring those ideas to a tokenomics model. And it's really, you can do that in a way that it's a utility token, right? And that's how we do it. One other legal nuance that is important is securities law. There's a lot to securities law. And one of the important points that people maybe don't think about as much is that this is more a little bit of a legal concept. But when you actually put money in a project, you're putting kind of project in your business. If it's a partnership, if it's a limited partnership or whatever, it's more of a partnership. It's something that you're contributing to as a part of the organization, and that's how we build our DAO and our structure. The securities law actually don't apply. And this is something that people don't talk about as much because you're part of the business. You can't really sell a security to yourself, right? You're contributing money to your own business. Why would they, right? Does that make sense? So like, why would they punish you for trying to contribute to your own business? And so that's why all the contributors are kind of part of the business. They can vote in the DAO. They can take active participation in it. As long as they have the potential to actively participate in it, I think you get around the securities law. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the legal side. It's like the Howey test is the main test that people use. It's an investment of money in a common enterprise with an expectation of profits solely derived from the efforts of others. This fourth point is what we're challenging. We're saying, hey, we're not basing it solely on the efforts of others, right? So there are people that are significant contributors, like early team members, but it's not solely just based on what we do. You're also participating, you're voting, you're part of this DAO, right? And that in itself actually separates you legally from a DAO. It's just never been tested in courts. Gensler's never commented on that, and he probably doesn't even come across this table. But if you did challenge that in the courts, I would think you would win. There's other issues that you have to consider with DAOs, but that's another conversation.